So we are tapping into the next topic. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence and the correlation between designing change and climate actions and equity. We have two short presentations, after which we'll have a panel conversation. And it is my honor to actually question a little bit if it's a tool or something else. I think this man-machine conversation is as old as mankind, right? Will artificial intelligence take us all over or not? These are some of the things we will touch upon. I say we because I'm here to welcome a journalist and a photographer and the founding father, together with a friend, of New Horizon Initiative. I'm talking about Mr. Dirk Jan Visser.
Wow. Yeah, it's working. Well, thank you all, and thank you for having me. My name is Dirk Jan Visser, and I'm one of the founders of the New Horizon Initiative. And again, it's a pleasure of being here and guiding you through this project. So, with an artistic practice, we contribute to the imagination and position of non-human life in a human system. Inspired by the Rights of Nature movement and using artificial intelligence, New Horizon Initiative is an advocacy tool to empower all life and give them a voice in political and organizational decision-making. So what we do with New Horizon Initiative, we look at landscapes. We look at who the stakeholders are in the landscape, and then we start mapping what the interests of these different stakeholders are. We bring in this project as many as possible voices to the table to determine what a future-proof landscape can look like. In this presentation, I'm showing two landscapes, namely the desert landscape in the South Sinai, where we've been working for during the UN Climate Change Summit in 2022, and in our backyard, the province of Groningen, up north in the Netherlands. Yes, so foremost, the starting point of New Horizon Initiative is that we are an artistic practice, but we have an interdisciplinary approach. So we use science, we use technology, and we use public affairs to get all these practices into the advocacy to advocate for the position of non-human life in organizational decision-making. And this is also how we designed our team. We have Drake, who is an artist and responsible for the visual language. Myself, a background in arts and journalism. I have a teaching position at the art school in The Hague, and I'm quite active in the cultural and political arena. We have Mariana Hohanyan. She is developing our own AI interface, our machine. Mohammed Zakaria, an ecologist, a scholar at Wageningen University and trained as a vegetation specialist, and Nienke Roth, who also has an artistic background, and she's helping us with communication in order to do this public affairs, to work towards the position of non-human life in organizational decision-making. Yeah, so foremost, we are a networking practice. We show alternative views. We're proposing a perspective, and that we do that to political and governance environments, bringing the interest of humans, but also bringing the interest of non-humans. So, for example, in the province of Groningen, our backyard, there's a lot of human interest. You have the energy transition, what's going on there, the industrial interest. There's a massive agricultural interest. Over 7% of the world population, the world seed potato is cultivated in this area. We are next to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Waddenzee, which also brings a lot of interest. And, for example, you have the Montagu harrier, a bird that also has an interest in this landscape. So the question is, like, how can you design a future-proof landscape? So, based on scholarly research, we make a visual inventory of all different types of vegetation and landscape elements that are important for the domestic flora and fauna. We speak with inhabitants, with human inhabitants, with interest groups, with farmers, with companies, and so on. We look at the needs of humans as well as non-human stakeholders, animals that are disappeared or species that are on the IUCN Red List. We use all of these images to make a visual inventory and include environmental data to make a visual stakeholder analysis through AI. Oh, And there we're going. Sorry. And show how a landscape can look like when the interests of all stakeholders are represented. And I was hoping that this film was, of course, during this talk. Eventually, we go to the visual stakeholder analysis and then through AI. Yes. So how does our AI machine works? For example, we have the stakeholder, the stout here. We have two data streams. One data stream is the visual elements that are important for this specific stakeholder. We photograph, and that's a visual data stream, images. We document what the interest of the stout is in a specific landscape. And we have the environmental data. What kind of environmental conditions are important to the stout? We combine these two data streams into our AI machine, and eventually the AI starts rendering images, how an ideal landscape, for example, for the stout can look like in the context of the province of Groningen, our backyard. The outcome that we're aiming for is that we, of course, have images. Our AI renders images, which we collage into a more artistic into an artistic representation. We are working towards a digital twin, and eventually also the digital twin should work towards an AR and VR experience. Well, here we have a work from the desert in Egypt, where we concluded, based on all the images that we make and the conclusion of the AI, that this would be an ideal landscape of all the different species that were part of our visual stakeholder analysis. In this image, for example, is a representation of the interest of the stout, in Dutch the hermelijn, in the context of Groningen. So we took over, I think, 5,000 to 7,000 images of spaces and places that are important for the stout. And eventually the AI renders came up with this image as an ideal landscape for the stout. Yeah, I think it's important that we really like that this artistic practice that we are using is an advocacy tool to bring together, first of all, local communities to get a better understanding of their living environment. We bring it to the boardroom, to political environments, and where decisions are made, and we show the perspectives or different perspectives. And of course, we bring it to the arts and the cultural field in musea. For example, here, during the UN Climate Change Summit, we were privileged being part of the Creative Climate Coalition to bring it there, to the Dutch Design Week, and a lot of talks in academia we're organizing recently. So, the artificial intelligence, and I think this is also the conversation we're going to have after this talk. For us, it's important that we are the owner of our own data. So we're not scraping the internet, but we are creating our own images. We have an own machine, and of course it is image-driven. Yeah, and that is like the challenge. The digital footprint of AI is massive. So we're also rethinking, like, how can we do it? We try to run it locally on a computer, but again, this is a challenge. The technical developments is a challenge. Language, like what is a good image that you can convince a policymaker to say, yeah, we can take this perspective into account, and we take the voices of non-human life in organizational decision making. That's a challenge. And last one, policymakers are particular, and our project is crossing straight through all different kinds of policy areas. And they find it sometimes difficult. So convincing them to use our method is also a challenge. It was a very short presentation. Please come to me after this presentation. We can have a discussion about it. And I want to thank you.
Yeah, in a second, Dirk-Jan is going to be joined by our second speaker, and we're going to have a little discussion here on stage together with Saskia as well. So enjoy your seat, Dirk-Jan. Thanks very much. Our next speaker is an architect by trade. She is also, amongst other things, someone who loves exploring how to address and correct bias in algorithms and transform artificial intelligence as a tool for restoration. She was also earlier in the breakout sessions on AI, if anyone was here for that. So please give a round of applause. Afaina de Jong.
Hi, everyone. I have a bit of a cold, so I hope my voice does well. I'm the founder of AFARAI, which is an experimental studio that works on the boundary of art and architecture for the last 20 years now. My work is deeply connected to people and cultural movements that are traditionally not part of the architectural profession or architectural form. And really, one of the ways of engaging with that and creating is through spatial design and through creating this artistic aesthetic language. I think, another thing that I find quite hard in the profession of architecture is that it's actually based on a very narrow set of knowledge. And I think, if we think about modern architecture, it's part of modernity. And in that sense, it's unmistakably rooted in colonialism. And this is very contrary to, how architects see modern architecture. I think in modern architecture, we see colonialism more as a time period or a style, and maybe not as an actual system. A system in which a lot of the exploitative practices and also, the extraction of labor and resources were created. And I think this plays into the difficulties of reproduction and also the difficulties that we face in this century, right? Because how do we engage with problems in the 21st century if we only have a limited set of knowledge and practice at our behest? So this is a work I created for the 17th Architecture Biennale in Venice together with Deborah Solomon. And it propositions a canon made up out of women, our foremothers, those who are not with us anymore, and really kind of foregrounding their work. I mean, I think they represent the majority of people in the sense that they are women, they are queer, they have indigenous backgrounds, but also indirectly are linked to the spatial practice, And I feel like here we see a practice and a set of knowledges that should be foundational for architecture, right? If we want to engage in the 21st century. But how do you really activate this knowledge that you can find in a new canon, right? How do you activate it beyond kind of this prestigious architectural event and really implement it in architectural profession? And this is why I started the Embodied Restoration Lab. And the Embodied Restoration Lab introduces algorithmic systems design as a framework or a lens to kind of look at architecture in a systemic way. How do we reassign value or attribution or classification in a different way so that we can actually arrive at a restorative version of architecture that is more in balance with kind of the ecological and social situations that we are in now. So this is me kicking off the first Embodied Restoration Lab. I invited 20 scholars, professionals, being architects, designers, data scientists, mathematicians, climate justice activists, a really wild bunch of people from all around the world to come to Rotterdam. And really, over the course of a couple of days, we dove into what an algorithmic system could be, right? So a collective effort to really exchange knowledge, to be kind of this embodied physical neural network, but also to transfer this knowledge into a model or multiple models or tools, as you could call them. And personally, I don't think AI is going to save us or it's going to save the world. I mean, I'm pretty critical of it. It also, conflates complexity, but I'm also enthusiastic about the development of algorithmic thinking because it has the ability to raise questions beyond the tool, right? And if we think about tools, I think what we can imagine as humans or as architects or as designers is of course linked to the tools and technologies that we have at our disposal. So in the case of architecture, this is like what we often start with. This is like the blank AutoCAD page. It's very boring. At the same time, it also represents, the thinking around tabula rasa, right? Which of course has a connection to lots of the thinking in architecture that modernists like Le Corbusier also applied when they had to design for instance, Addis Abeba, an ancient city that had been there for years. Le Corbusier was like, yeah, it's a tabula rasa, it's a blank slate, just like AutoCAD. And I think some of these issues are being enhanced at the moment where AI is entering the architectural work field. Over 40% of architects are now using AI in the concepting. But in a way, it still has in the how do you say, in the solution space that the AI offers, still has the inheritances of modernist thinking and colonialism at its base. And I don't think it will help us kind of get out of the ecological and social crisis that we are in at the moment. Akile Mbembe points it out very well, I think, in this text. As we are now in this phase of human history, in which anything that is not, countable or can be datafied, it's not part of really algorithmic reality or the future. We are at a point in which many oral knowledges, discourses, practices, indigenous practices, but also diasporic practices will not be part of the solution space, right? And will get marginalized again. We work in three parts of the algorithm. So one is input, right? So what is even the data or the archive that we use when training this AI? And I think here is an opportunity to create a community. There's an opportunity to articulate consent, to attribute value also in the metadata. And then the black box, I think the black box is the most extractive part of AI because it just slurps in all of this knowledge and makes all these relations that we don't even know, what gets connected. It doesn't attribute, it doesn't reference. So really, our aim was to make this black box more transparent and hopefully a bit more decolonial, if possible. And then we work in the field of output, like what real tools or models can we make for architects? And I'm an architect, so honestly, I can't do this by myself. We collaborate with many great people. For instance, one of the models we tested during the days was Baby AI, developed by Radical Data, really taking the idea of raising a child. What do we give this model? What should this model know to survive in the 21st century, right? And Baby AI, actually, all the knowledge that we trained it with and put in during the days, when you asked it questions, it gave you back what it used. So it showed you actually which relationships and which attributions it was making. Another model we made was the Audre Lorde language model. And then, with EO Bisek, also an amazing artist and coder, we work on the archive, raising archives collectively, really taking image generation and merging it with oral discourse, so tagging it with oral storytelling, and then we're going to generate new image also through speaking and orality. And on the bottom, I mean, it looks like a little bit of a boring picture, but it's actually one of the outputs that we're working on. It's basically taking the large language models and the image database and putting it together with real-time ecological data from very specific sites. So for instance, you could take Tuvalu Island, an island that's going to be underwater. So we could connect it to the real-time ecological data to kind of non-extractive practices that have been taking place there throughout the ages, and also merge it all together. So you actually get this like hyper-contextualized tool to design with, instead of the blank slate in AutoCAD that I showed you before. I think this is my last slide. Part of the Embodied Restoration Lab was also the reflection sessions, in which we reflected and shared a lot of the knowledge that we worked through during the days. The sessions were all moderated by Dr. Ramon Amaro, who is the director of the -1 Lab at the New Institute. The podcasts, they will be available as podcasts, or they are. And you can find them on the Revisions Media website. If you want to stay posted on further developments, because I only had 8 minutes, so I don't know if I spoke too fast. But thank you, and follow me if you want to know more about the Embodied Restoration Lab.
Afaina de Jong! Yeah. Please have a seat, Afaina.
Wow.
So,
well, I hope if I have a cold, I perform as well as that, because that was just like, fascinating.
Oh my God,
Thank you very much.
I'll bring you a glass of water in 1 second, but maybe kicking off, Dirk-Jan. Dirk-Jan, I was somehow listening at your presentation. I thought you sort of totally fit in 17th century painting to a certain extent, in terms of landscape painting and how you kiss them to life. And we are meeting, let's say, a reappreciation of the local. Some elements are already brought in, the ethical dimensions of all of that. So I was wondering if you would unpack a little bit how you hope that your new initiative, actually New Horizon initiative, reaches these policymakers that you mentioned in your presentation. What are you hoping that you would shift?
Well, I hope to shift, well, we're aiming for to shift that the perspectives of non-human life, of animals, are also, stakeholders in the landscape are taken into account in the decision making. And because at the end of the day, and that's a longer conversation and discussion on like why we want that, but I think it will also deserve biodiversity and sustainability.
Yeah.
And relating to the 17th century painting, and that's a very interesting one. Because I have also doubts whether what kind of visual language do you need, and what is your visual language and where you're attracted in. And then I also discovered that certain people on certain levels have another visual taste than I will necessarily have. And apparently they really, we also have another work that is really I would say an 1920s Orientalistic impression of a landscape, of a desert landscape. What I think, for me it's a really colonial angle. And then also some CEOs say, well, this is fantastic, this is amazing, I recognize everything I love in the desert. So the question is like, what language do you need to convince people in taking care?
Yeah.
And you need AI for that, do you?
Well, what do you think? It's no, definitely you don't.
I'm saying it because I was looking at the representations that it came up with, and I did think, like, after all the preparatory work, the research, the questions, the data selection, you could do that, and then ask, a designer, an actual person, to create what, the image of what you'd like it to be, rather than the kind of blurry but albeit like interesting images that you generated.
Yeah, this is like we are like at the end of the beginning. And I think what we're working on right now, and there I think AI is a fantastic tool, is the digital twin. So we can also have like all the environmental data with the statistical data can be part of the AI. And this is and part of the visual rendering of visual outcome. And this is something, yeah, maybe a designer can do it, but it's more data analyzation than designing, I think.
Okay, it's a bit of a bridge to, just a question for Afaina. As you were talking, I was thinking about the creative process, right? And Adele's, he briefly described his creative process, just seeing a dog having a poo inspired like an incredible drawing. What you want to do, as a journalist, I appreciate putting attribution and transparency, it's all good, but is that not like putting brakes on AI? Isn't the exciting thing about AI that it can reflect almost our creative process? You take music, you take art, you take film, and then you create something, and then you...
What's the question?
Yeah, sorry, thinking out loud as I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
Can't too much focus on attribution and transparency actually end up not making the most out of artificial intelligence?
I mean, I think if the way I see it is, you know, we're talking about extraction, we want to counter extraction, then you have to also put that in your system, right? And I think that's the point of the Embodied Restoration Lab. It's not per se like, we're going to make cool images. It's like, if you really think through in a systemic way, you know, how you create, you can use the algorithmic setup to kind of make choices of what you value. And I think in that, I value the fact that I think you should know, you know, whose information you're using, or whose art you're using, or whose writing you're using, right? Like, and because what I don't like about it now is that I put a question in and I get something back, and I don't know what it's made out of. You have no idea of the relationships that are being made. It can just be like, you know, cooking a soup of whatever, you know. Whilst actually, I would like to have a very specified answer, you know. I think that's actually good. And I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, actually.
Yeah, no, it does.
Maybe I can pick up on, you also mentioned the idea of footprint, right? Yesterday, Google let's say, exposed themselves that they're a little bit in shock about the vast footprint the artificial intelligence has at the moment. And for those of you, just to get a sense, we are surpassing our data footprint at the moment, is surpassing our aviation footprint. So there's a lot of, you know, flight shaming going on, but not so much data shaming. But that's not what I want to talk about. There's an excellent session here before that talked a little bit about maybe just seeing it for the tool it is, right? So demystifying slightly this whole apparatus of knowledge, because as it is a sort of pattern repeating, right? So there's still ample of room for the creative output. But the question I would want to put forward to both of you is maybe this forward-facing artificial intelligence. Like, how do you, obviously in your case it's the intersectional, the feminist agenda that you want to bring in, the extractive agenda. How do you hope that artificial intelligence that is still in its infant stage would evolve? What is absolutely crucial? Dirk Jan.
Well, I think what is absolutely crucial is that there's this transparency over the use of artificial intelligence, that it's clear like what kind of data is used, who is the owner of the data, and what do you want to express using artificial intelligence. And otherwise it will stay the black box, and I mean it can be used and it can be abused also in storytelling.
Yeah. And that's why you mentioned that you were actually using your own photography to sort of not...
Yeah, and also like, and we also using only the data with scientists where we're working with. Yeah. And also we want to be transparent about it, that there's also like somehow a responsibility of using the AI machine, and like that the use of the AI machine is a method, and the method is important also like in our practice, in our advocacy.
Yeah.
Afaina?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not per se interested in demystifying, you know, this tool, but I'm a designer, I'm an architect, and I think it's just a great opportunity at the time to kind of develop tools that can actually help us move forward, you know, because there is a lot of complexity in the issues that we are dealing with as architects, you know, so I think therefore AI is great because we can use real-time data, we can like bring in all of these, you know, books and ways of doing things, practices, imagery that have not been part of architecture for so long, you know, and we can bring that in through a tool I mean, isn't it great that we can actually design a system instead of, like, as architects, you're always kind of like thrown into a system or an infrastructure and you have no agency and you're just kind of like doing with what you have or what you get. So I think that's, for me, is very exciting about it, you know. At the same time, I also, like I said before, I also would like it to stay away from some of the extraction that has been part of architecture, but also of AI. You know, if we talk about energy or attribution, you know, referencing. So I think that is then fundamental to that system. So we have to do that if we want to arrive at a better version of it.
The example that you showed was just illustrated that perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. I've just been given the international sign for finish up, that one. Okay, but thank you very much to
Afaina de Jong
and Dirk.
and Dirk Visser.